Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time today to join us. We are all very excited to formally launch this youth employee resource group at CGIAR. My name is Julian Bañuelos. I'm from CIMIT, based in Mexico. We have a very special program for everyone today, so we hope you learn something new, take some useful advice from today's session. There is interpretation available in French and Spanish. Just have to click on the bottom on the globe icon in the menu for Spanish or French interpretation. So let's get started. Let's introduce ourselves in the chat section. Feel free to introduce yourself, type in where you're logging in from, your center, and in one or two sentences, share with us what motivated you to join today's session. So we have someone from Colombia, welcome. Mexico, great. We're happy to have you too, Laura, thanks for joining. Kenya, Zimbabwe, great. So we have representation from around the world. This is great. All of the regions of the CGIAR are represented. That's pretty cool. That's amazing. So thanks everyone again for joining. Let's get started now. I would like to now introduce the Youth ERG group, the group that put this together. It would not have been possible without their help. Myself, Julian, from CIMIT, we have Krishna from the CGIAR in France, Muriel from Africa Rice, and Eric from CIP in Peru. Our vision and mission, so when we first started this group, our long-term vision was to provide a space in the CGIAR for early in career and youth professionals to access meaningful opportunities for growth, support, mentorship for all professions, for all backgrounds. That is our long-term vision. How do we hope to accomplish this? Well, we hope to accomplish this by promoting, advocating, and establishing networks that promote knowledge sharing through mentoring sessions, webinars, workshops, and an efficient internal communications throughout the system for inclusive virtual career growth spaces. So we appreciate your attendance here because this is our launch. This is the opportunity for you to get involved and really voice how you envision this youth ERG really taking shape in the coming years. So that is that's how we envision this group. And today's agenda, we will begin by defining personal branding. We will have a fireside chat with our sponsor. And finally, we'll end up with, we'll close with practical tips on how to build your personal brand. Participate actively throughout the session, keep an open mind, ask questions. We are open to answer your questions, any doubts you may have, and participate as well. That's how you can get the most out of this session. So next slide, please.
Thank you, Julian, for the warm introduction and welcoming the new ERG into creating much more inclusive spaces in CGIAR. So I'm really excited that this is the newest ERG that's going to be launched, and pretty more that will be upcoming as well as we enter the new year. One thing to also just add and clarify is that this group, with its clear vision and mission, as you saw earlier, is open to anyone who is passionate about advancing, youth and supporting youth in the workplace. And part of today, as we've heard from different groups that have shared about what are some of the struggles and challenges when it comes to early in career talent, is this concept around personal branding. And of course, taking this opportunity to introduce to you what the Youth ERG is about, let's also talk about a topic that's very personal to all of us. It's our personal brand. So I'd love to start by getting you engaged in the chat to answer this short question. Is your personal brand determined by you or the people around you? What do you think? Type in the chat. Do you think that a personal brand or your personal brand is determined by yourself or the people around you? What do you think is the answer? Type it in the chat. Okay, I see it's determined by yourself. I can see the first one. Is it determined by you or the people around you? Gonna host determined by yourself. Okay. So I see a majority of responses. And once again, there is no right or wrong. Yeah. So I have to agree with Jose and Laura. It is a combination of both, right? Because I used to think when I was starting out in my career that, I dictate what I want the world to see me as. I build out my own personal brand. But actually, the reality is my personal brand is what people say about me. It's ultimately the case, right? A personal brand is what you are known for and how people experience you. So if we think about it based on this definition, it's about what people say about us. And of course, there are still elements within our control and being able to influence how people see us. But as an outcome, it's how people think about us, how people perceive us, how people experience us. It's not actually within our control. But what we can control is how we bring who we are to what we do and how we do it to make sure that it's very consistent with how people would describe us. And once again, why we're spending so much time on this topic is because when we are able to be consistently delivering our values and our strengths and what we stand for with other people around us, it can open the door to newer opportunities. And that's why this topic is so important to us. And why we're spending this time to talk about the importance around personal branding. It's once again defined by the people that we work with, not just only by ourselves. So I would love to hear your reactions in the chat, right? We've already kind of understood and unpacked or demystified that sometimes personal branding is not within our control. It's what the public has to say about us. It's what our stakeholders have to say. So I'd love to hear from you. When you think about the concept about personal branding, what are some of your concerns about personal branding? What are some of the initial reactions or thoughts that you might have when you think about the word personal branding or the concept of it? Feel free to be as authentic and as straightforward in the chat. What are some thoughts or initial sentiments that come to mind when you think about the term personal branding? Type it in the chat. Is it something that you feel comfortable with? Is it something that, what is your reaction when you think about the concept of personal branding? I see Laura is sharing, will people, is it an extra burden or stress? I'm pretty open to it. Yeah. Is it an extra work to be done? Right. So I can agree, and I see that sentiments that I see when we talk about the concept of personal branding, particularly with early in career colleagues, we might have people saying, you know what, personal branding is inauthentic. It's not who I am. I just want to do the work and let it speak for itself. Or perhaps it's something that I'm not thought of before, right? It's something that has not occurred to me. Or yes, I'll focus on delivering. I'm still early in my career. I'll focus on the personal branding aspect later. But if we're already looking back at our earlier definition that personal branding is so essential for our career advancement and growth. And it's also something that we need to take ownership of and to make sure that people experience us the way that we want it to be. Then we have to really rethink some of these initial thoughts of this that we might have and reframe it to think, hey, personal branding is still ultimately being authentic. It's being true to who I am. And I'm just simply articulating my passions, my skills, and my values with others so that people around me or people who could be influential know about what I stand for, what my strengths are, and how they can best support me along the way. It's ultimately being consistent with who you are. It's not about being something more, something completely different that's not consistent with who you are. It's just about amplifying what those skill sets are to people who could help you and support you along your career advancement. And secondly, if you are not taking the effort to brand yourself, then other people will take control of it and do it for you. Ultimately, what's so important is that you need to control that narrative. What do people say about you when you are not in the room? That's something that you definitely want to take ownership of, because once again, this will have a huge impact about the opportunities that you get, the sponsorship, the advancement in your future careers going forward, whether be it in CGIAR or another organization outside as well. So this is one of the key things that we tend to see as an opportunity to really reframe how we think about personal branding. So if we recognize that this is a very important concept, where do we start? How do we build a personal brand that's meaningful and that's authentic to us? A very simple way to look at this is to break down personal branding into 3 key elements. The first would be clarity. Do you clearly know your strengths, your values, and your interests? And are you able to clearly articulate them? If I ask you right now to come off mute to share all these 3 components in a coherent, concise, and short sentence. This is your ability to create clarity, what you stand for in a really short pitch. Secondly, the second C is about communicating. Have you identified opportunities to engage with the relevant people, the relevant networks or events to really showcase your personal brand? So you've got the clarity, you know who you are. Have you found the right platforms for you to let the right people know who you are and for them to really help you amplify your passions further and to get you the right opportunities to help you enhance your brand and to achieve your career aspirations? And the last C is around consistency. Of course, you can put yourself out to the world. You've got a coherent, concise message. You've got the right people who know about you. But most importantly, can you walk the talk? When you say you've demonstrated these values and these strengths and these passions, are you actually, consistently demonstrating that in your everyday actions? So these are 3 C's that we look at that are critical elements to building your personal brand: clarity, communication, and consistency. And I recognize that all of these 3 C's look like very vague concepts right now. And to help bring them to life, as Julian mentioned, I'll hand this over to Julian and our sponsor, Tamina, to walk you through a short fireside chat. And after that, we'll arm you with practical tips for you to improve your personal brand in each of these 3 dimensions. I hope you're looking forward to it, and we'll unpack this concept of personal branding together. Julian and Tamina, over to you.
Thank you, Edwin. I'm now very honored to introduce Tamina Lalani Sharif. She is the CGIAR Regional Director for South Asia and brings over 20 years of experience in management, business development, advocacy, and volunteering. Tamina, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Julian. It's great to be here.
So going over what Edwin, the basic definition of what personal branding is and introducing us to the 3 Cs, when you were starting your career, what was your initial perception of personal branding and how has it changed throughout the course of your career?
So I have to say, you guys, first off, thank you for having me. And by putting me in this fireside chat, you guys got me thinking again about my personal brand. I hadn't thought about it in a while. And there's a comment in the chat there that I can see where somebody has said, well, I hadn't really thought about it. And I think that was me very early in my career. Very early on, I used to make decisions in my career based on what interested me. I, moved to this job, I'd move to that job. I eventually ended up opening up a consulting firm because the part of consulting that I enjoyed was that I constantly was climbing up a learning ladder, right? I was constantly having to learn something new in order to get in the heads of my clients. And that's what I really liked. And then at the end of my first overseas, and I had constantly had kind of this dream about working overseas, and Canadian, if you can't tell by the accent. And at the end of my first overseas assignment, I ended up back in Canada, kind of looking around thinking, hey, now what? And somebody said to me, well, you need to build a new dream. And that was really the turning point for me, where I really sat down and it made me stop and think about what I wanted, what would make me happy in my career, what would fulfill me. And that's when I really started to think about, what is my personal brand? What am I about in my career? And so that was kind of the trigger point, I think. And since that point, it's kind of grown over time and it's become more and more defined over time. But I still go back to that initial kind of turning point where I did quite a bit of kind of self-reflection about what do I want that brand to be about, and then it's kind of grown over time since then.
Personally speaking, for you, have you had any key values or strengths that have been consistent throughout, or any areas of interest that have remained the same? I mean, you mentioned going overseas, right? But what are those key values and strengths that have stayed with you throughout?
Yeah, so good question. So I think my values were there long before what I recognized as my strengths, or what was going to be kind of that calling for me, if you will. I know calling sounds a little kind of airy-fairy, but for me it really was about what matters to me. So I mean, around values, I've always been fairly value driven. So values around humility, around honesty, around hard work, around integrity, around excellence. Those were sort of the things that have always shaped my life from a very young age and early in my career. But it took me until this kind of turning point to really realize that the one kind of red thread that was running through my career at that point was this real love of learning and this real enjoyment of learning. And it wasn't just my learning that I was enjoying, it was watching how people change and how knowledge and learning and information shapes people's lives. And that was a real turning point for me when I started to realize that really knowledge and how it enhances a quality of life is really meaningful to me. I had long known that I wanted to have a very kind of mission-driven career. I wanted something that was not just about making a dollar, but about actually making a difference in people's lives. And then when I was able to sort of connect those two pieces around knowledge and information, and the way that it changes and enhances the quality of people's lives, that was a real point for me around just my areas of interest. And so then I started to direct my career choices more and more towards that. And so you see in my career a greater and greater kind of affinity to working with universities, working with research organizations, working with science and technology organizations and companies. And that was all sort of part of that. And then it was a little bit later that I kind of started to realize that, oh, one of the things I really like is I'm a problem solver, and now I say that quite freely, but it took me a while to realize that I'm a problem solver. I'm a very avid learner, and I love to build things. You know, it's a running joke in our family that, you know, if you ask Tamina to maintain something, it'll probably die. But if you ask her to build something, you know, the sky's the limit, right?
And as an early career professional myself, I'm curious to know, how did you engage these opportunities like Edwin mentioned, and what were some effective actions that you adopted to build and kind of build on that personal brand, and what networks in specific have proven beneficial or throughout your career?
Yeah, so in terms of how did I build that brand, I think my early days as a consultant really came into it because, you know, I knew that sort of being seen as somebody who embodied excellence and integrity and hard work in her brand, I felt that that was really about living my values, right? And so I often would put myself in my client's shoes. You know, I would put myself and client being my external client as a consultant, but even once I was working within larger organizations, you always have a client, right? There's always somebody who you're working with or for to provide something to. And so I would try very hard to put myself in their shoes and think, you know, what do I want them to think about me? And you know, the entrepreneur in me kicks in, and it's like, what do I need to do to win the next piece of business from them? And I'm not necessarily advocating that for everybody, but that was definitely a mindset that works for me. You know, it's always about, you know, that phrase, you're only as good as your last project, that rings very true to me, and that speaks to me. And so that often motivated me to think about, to be, you know, really assess the work that I was doing and to be a little bit critical. There is the risk of being overly critical with yourself. And so I would say at the same time, be kind. And it took me a long time to learn to be kind to myself. But that was very much kind of the mindset. And then you asked me a question about networks. So I was thinking about, you know, when I think about networks, as you were asking, I was thinking about networks, and I haven't tapped into sort of those typical networks. Like a lot of people stay in touch with, you know, alumni groups or old classmates. And I haven't necessarily done that in a really concerted effort. I think one of the things that has been a real, again, another red thread through my career has been volunteerism. Volunteerism is something that's really important to me. I believe for me, it's a really important part of giving back. But it's a really essential part of who I am. But what I've noticed over the years is that it's become a really essential part of my career growth too, ironically. It gives me a chance to learn new things. I often get to work outside my comfort zone because I can take on things in a volunteer capacity that people would never let me take on in paid employment. It grows my skill set that way. It has actually, as I've taken on leadership roles in volunteer organizations, it has actually really tested my leadership skills and helped me to refine them and define who I am as a leader. And the other benefit of that in terms of your question around networks is that I've met a whole host of people and become really good friends and stayed in touch with people that, again, I would never have had the opportunity to meet in a regular everyday situation. And because you're doing something together and you're both motivated sort of by the same cause, I think the bond you connect with, like you can kind of rely on each other and say, hey, I need help with this, or I need help with that. And they're always, what I've found at least, is that these people are always happy to connect you into their network. So it's almost kind of a wider net, I would say. If that makes sense.
Right. So it's staying open to opportunity, right? Essentially.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
seeing a question here by Richa. You worked overseas for many years. Do you think the social cultural change also impacts the personal branding? How did you pull living in a foreign land? Was it easy or difficult? And this kind of integrates well with the last C, right? Consistency. How did you ensure that these values that you built in college and before, and as an early career professional, right? How did you ensure that your personal brand remained consistent? And when you had those moments of harsh self-criticism, how did you keep yourself in check?
Yeah, so I love Richa's question. Thanks, Richa. Love it. It's a really good question, and I think it's been sort of a yin and a yang thing for me, because so as a Canadian, I didn't always feel like Canadian, but a child of immigrants in Canada. I didn't always feel like I fit in Canada growing up, and so I always felt like I was sort of other. And I think that was part of the push to go overseas and experience the world overseas. And lo and behold, got overseas and realized that, I don't really fit here either, but I think nonetheless, it has kind of living between the two worlds has really helped me to, it's helped me to refine my personal brand even more. It's helped me to come back to those values of sort of humility, and that real appreciation of pluralism and the value in being able to learn something from every single person, right? So being able to stop and take a breath and see that perspective, or see that issue from from their perspective. And I think living overseas has even enhanced that even further, right? Because sometimes I sit in meetings at the CG and I just I start to giggle sometimes, because I look around the table, whether it's virtual or actual, and I think, how many languages, how many cultures, how many countries are represented here, right? And it's fantastic. Like, where else in the world would you get to work with that many different cultures and languages and perspectives, right? And it makes what we produce so much richer. And so that's one of the things I love about this work, because it helps me to refine my own brand. But then to come back to your question around, kind of walking the talk. I don't really necessarily think about having to ensure that I walk the talk. I'm more focused on, I think about it just in terms of I live my values. I try really, really hard to just live my values every single day. For those of you that know me, you may know I have 3 children, and I often used to say that when they were little, they often used to challenge me to live my values every day. And I find that in my career and personally as well. And then, oftentimes the other thing I start to think about in terms of, how do you stay true to yourself? I try to think about whether my dad would be proud of me, to be really honest. And I think that sort of speaks to me, and it makes me think about, yeah, okay, that's me, that's me, that's legit me, because my dad would be proud of me,
Well, that's so sweet.
um,
And so tying all this experience that you're kind of briefly going through, I'm just curious to know, what's one thing, as Laura also asks this question in the chat, you would tell your younger self earlier in your career, now that you have accomplished all this and traveled and lived overseas, and have just been in so many spaces, right? Multicultural spaces. What's one thing you would tell your younger self?
So a couple of things I would tell my younger self. I would give myself a pat on the back for taking on the volunteer opportunities that I have, because I can't say enough about how much those have really taught me how to be a leader. They've really taught me how to show up, and it really made me think about, how do I want to show up, right? And at the end of the day, that's what personal brand is about. It's about, how do you want to show up in the world, right? So I can't say enough about that. The other things I would tell my younger self earlier in my career is, I would tell myself not to be afraid. Don't be afraid to take on new things, to take on things that scare you, to take on things that you don't think you're quite qualified to do, because you should be fairly confident that you're a pretty bright and pretty capable person, and you can probably figure it out. And then the other thing I would tell my younger self is, that you're probably more powerful than you're giving yourself credit for. And I would say that to all the people on this call too, is that we often underestimate, I think we often underestimate our own capacity and our own capabilities. And I wish we wouldn't, because I think we could accomplish amazing things if we just kind of weren't afraid to make mistakes, just went out there into the world and tried it, right? And if you do make a mistake, that's okay, because you know what, you'll learn from the mistake, right? And I know people always used to tell me that as a youngster, and I always used to, and even when I was kind of young, mid to early in my career, and I would think, oh no, but you know, what will everybody think? You know what? They'll just think that you made a mistake, and just don't make the same mistake twice, right? Move on.
Right. I mean, I think it's a theme also in your career, right? It's these small building blocks that end up kind of building this personal brand that changes throughout time and based on experience. So thank you so much, Tamina, for this chat. We learned a lot.
Oh, good. I'm glad, Julian. You've made me think of one more thing. If I might just take 1 minute and add one more thing, which is that it's a great observation on your part that my career has been made up of smaller building blocks. And the thing it made me think of is that when I came into my professional life, you know, came out of graduate school and was all ready to take on the world, and there was sort of this this narrative that kept coming up that you had to work this linear road to wherever you wanted to go. And I wasn't ready to do that. You know, I wasn't the kind of person that wanted to work that linear road. And I always sort of doubted whether this was going to get me where I wanted to go. And that would be maybe the other thing that I would have told my younger self is don't be afraid of not necessarily following the road that everybody else tells you. So, you know, I hopscotched around and I had all these little building blocks, but you have to kind of have the faith that you're going to be able to build those into something bigger, right? That non-linear kind of following your path, it will take you where you want to go. So I'll stop there. I'm getting very mushy now.
have faith, right? That's
have faith, yeah.
That's the takeaway.
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Tamina.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Over to you, Edwin.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed that fireside chat there, and also similarly got me thinking. So thank you, Julian and Tamina, for framing, you know, just real lived experiences around building a personal brand. So just to summarize, we can see that personal brand can be broken down into 3 main elements: clarity, communication, and consistency. 3 simple C's for us to be thinking about. So I hand the time over to each of you now, recognizing we still have time left in today's event. So what I just need you to do is just to do a simple personal brand audit or assessment, for a better word. So if you actually have either a piece of paper, or you can also just do this in your head as well, I'm going to flash 3 statements for you to reflect on, and you can put yourself on the continuum between strongly disagree with a score of 1 all the way to 5, which is strongly agree. And these are the 3 statements that reflect on the 3 C's of personal branding. And I'll read them out one by one. And all I'd like you to do is just to score yourself on these statements. And very shortly, I'll be putting us in a short breakout group just for 6 minutes for you to get to meet other colleagues as well, passionate about youth and passionate about personal branding, to have a chance to reflect of what has been discussed so far, just to really calibrate where you're at. And then we'll wrap up with some actions that you can take to improve on your personal branding going forward in a really short summary. So the first statement, we talked about clarity. So I can clearly articulate my strengths, values, and interests when I'm asked. When someone comes up to me, I can easily do it in at least a simple few sentences when I meet somebody. Will you score yourself between 1 to 5? So you can do this in your mind. You don't need to type your responses in the chat. Let's move on to the second statement on communicate. Do you invest time to build your personal brand with the right people? Will you score yourself between 1 or 5? And the last one, consistency. People consistently say that my actions and my behaviors and results reflect the personal brand that I want to put out in the world. Where will you score yourself? So I'll just give everyone just 1 minute to reflect on these 3 statements that you see here. And very shortly, I'll be putting you in a breakout group to introduce yourself and discuss where do you identify as potential opportunities for you to improve your personal brand, and also share what are some key takeaways that you've had. I recognize that 6 minutes is pretty short, but hopefully this will give you a chance to reflect and to learn from others as well, that you might find that someone else on this call is similarly wanting to improve in this area. So I'll just give everyone a minute to reflect on these 3 statements, and then shortly after, I'll open up the breakout group for 6 minutes. Okay, I'm opening up the breakout groups now. You should have an invite, and we'll see you back in 6 minutes.
Hey guys, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Rogelio Villarreal. I work at CIMIT as Global Head of Security.
Nice. Welcome to the call. Did you just join?
No, I've been listening in. I'm actually in the car right now. I'm about to get to a meeting. I didn't break it up since
Yep. Totally understand. Hopefully you enjoyed some of the conversations that were
to share with you how my personal brand got me this job.
Yeah. That's the
Great.
power of personal branding.
I built my personal brand on LinkedIn.
That is a great way of doing so. Yeah.
I didn't rely on what people say on the corridors, because generally those comments are negative. And when I did a good job with someone as a service provider in risk management, what I would do is ask them to please write something up on my LinkedIn if they had enjoyed the interaction with me.
Absolutely.
And I was continuously looking for positions of more responsibility and looking what they were looking for, and then adapting my curriculum and looking to gain new experiences that would align with those new responsibilities in other companies or in higher roles.
Yeah.
So that was the way that I built up my LinkedIn curriculum, and I got several recommendations from peers and from my previous bosses.
Yeah.
And actually, one of those recommendations was the one that got me this job.
Yeah, the power of LinkedIn, absolutely. I think it's something that people tend not to take. I do think that LinkedIn is a great platform for building networks and opportunities. Thank you for sharing your story.
It was a pleasure.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. We hope you got a good chance to just quickly get to know a few of your colleagues here on the call and had a chance to talk about personal branding. So we talked about the 3 C's, right? Clarity, communication, and building the right networks, and consistency. Which of the C would you see that you need to definitely want to improve on? Is it clarity? Is it communication? Or is it consistency? Type in the chat, which is the which of the C do you see that you need to definitely work on or improve? It could be 2, it could be all 3, it could be one of the C's. Which one is it that you've identified that there's an opportunity for you to practice and build further right after this call? Which of the C's do you see that there's an opportunity for you to improve on? Okay, I see clarity. Okay, Florence, you've mentioned clarity as well. Communicate. And it's good. It's good for us to be at a point to be able to reflect on this, like how well am I doing on this personal branding aspect? And which aspects do I need to focus on more? So I see quite a number of clarity, some around communication, some of consistency, and perhaps a mix of both. And this is great, right? And what I encourage you to do is that perhaps in 6 months from now, or even 3 months, you can just do a similar assessment of these 3 statements and to see, have you moved up and have they improved over time? I can see that you said that your group talked a lot about consistency. And yes, that's something that we don't often think about, right? We put our values out there, but are we walking that talk? Absolutely. Sarah, you talked about clarity as well. So what I want to leave you in this last 10 minutes is, what are some practical action steps for you to take if you're looking to improve in any of these 3 dimensions? Let's start first with clarity. Right. And the concept here that we'd like to introduce to you is the format of a personal pitch. If you've had the opportunity to meet a senior influential individual or leader, or even to your direct manager, and you were asked, right, tell me more about yourself, we often find ourselves tongue-tied or unsure of what to say. So here we have, it's a very clear, simple, concise format for you to introduce yourself. And if you're asked, start with your aspiration, which answers what are you excited about and what do you hope to achieve. And this is followed by a little bit of your backstory, where you can pick and choose relevant skills that speak to your aspirations, and then connecting it at the end. How does everything all fit together? When you use this framework, it makes it very clear, keeps yourself interesting, and that people are captivated by who you are. Oftentimes, when we are asked to make an introduction, we take them through a whole long list of our resume, and that could potentially lead them to be disinterested. But if we keep to a format of stating where we want to go, what we've done before, and how it all fits together, it can actually captivate someone's interest. And this is an example of how it can be done. To highlight your aspirations, you can simply start by saying, I'm really excited and passionate about crop breeding programs. I would be keen to gain experience to successfully manage the technical components of breeding programs in the future. You've clearly stated your passion and what you're interested in learning and your aspirations. I value continuous learning, and I've spent the last few years developing my skills by participating in a series of internal projects, and I also enrolled in various courses outside of work relevant to this field. So once again, I've articulated my past experience in a very short summary and also showed my interest and investment towards my aspirations. I am now ready for a more challenging assignment outside of my current role and would like to seek your mentorship and guidance to be an expert in the field. This is really wrapping it all up. And this can be as simple as 5 minutes in a conversation, because recognizing that some of the senior leaders might not have the time to listen to our full story, this is a very simple way of building a personal pitch. Start with aspiration, give a bit of your backstory, and show how it all connects together. A very simple, applicable tool that you can use anywhere around you. And not to worry, you will get access to the decks after this for your reference. For individuals on the call who are looking to build, communicate your brand, what we often recognize is that when we think about networks, there are three different types. There's the operational bit, where we work with people on a daily basis. There's the personal bit, the personal network that we work with people outside of our workplaces, for example, and they are of our choosing. And the last bit is strategic, people that can help recognize our ideas and get the information and resources that we need. What we do recognize is that when it comes to building the right networks, we need to be spending equally, or if not more time, focusing on our strategic networks. We often have really good operational on a daily basis and personal networks, but we've not often thought about who could be strategic in my network to help me bring my personal brand to life. It helped me recognize some of my aspirations and to get me better at my role. So how do we focus on those strategic operations and the strategic networks that we aim to build? 3 steps. Firstly, we need to start by evaluating our current network. Think about who isn't in my network that should be. Who should be knowing my goals apart from my manager? Who could actually help me get to where I want to be that I don't have in my network yet? And once you've actually identified that person or individuals, then the second thing that you like to do is to start bridging. And I recognize it can be very intimidating to reach out to somebody senior. So perhaps asking someone that you already know who could introduce you to someone. So what I always like to do is asking someone that I have a close operational network with or relationship with, and ask them, could you introduce me to that person? And that already makes things a lot easier because they can bridge that gap for you. And lastly, once that introduction has been made, we've got to make sure that we prepare and we plan for those meetings. So if it's someone that can really help further my goals or someone who shares a very similar interest with me, I'm going to make sure that I prepare my personal pitch and also questions around the topics that we like to discuss that can add value between both of us. So just in summary, we need to keep asking ourselves, who do we want in our network? Asking people that we already know to bridge that connection, and then making sure that we engage with them by asking good questions, sharing our personal pitch, and to be able to make sure that we are willing to do the work of building that network to enhance our personal brand. So that's about how we communicate. And last but not least, consistency. This is also, I would recommend, probably the most scariest of all activities. But the best way to know that whether we are walking the talk is to ask for feedback. Oftentimes, we get feedback at the end of the year in our performance reviews or when people do give it to us. But I encourage all of us here to be proactive about asking for feedback. It just simply shows that we have a growth mindset, we're willing to learn, and feedback is a gift. So how can you do it? I encourage you to regularly, either on a monthly or a quarterly basis, reach out to the people that you work with or who have experienced you. Tell them that your opinion matters. Tell them that their feedback matters to you, and give them time to provide you with the feedback that is effective and constructive. And you can organize a conversation with them to hear the feedback and thank them for giving it to you, whether could it be praise or also tough to hear, like developmental feedback. So this is how you could do it. And what could you ask in those questions? You could ask them, looking back at our working relationship so far, what are key strengths that I've demonstrated? And also looking ahead, what would you advise me to start doing, continue doing, and stop doing? And you will find so much good insights if your personal brand is consistent to how people are experiencing you. So these are 3 simple techniques that you could do to really amplify your personal brand. So a key takeaway is we all have a personal brand, whether we choose to or not. So we've got to keep investing in it and in this continuous dynamic journey and keep building on these 3 C's. And hopefully these 3 fundamental actions can help you build it going forward. I'll hand it over to Julian to wrap it up and to share how can you further participate in the youth ERG activities.
Thank you, Edwin. And one way you can invest in your personal brand or build your personal brand is to help us organize future initiatives for next year. We are looking for new members that will provide their input, their voice, opinions on how we can build a functional, valuable youth ERG across the CGIAR. All you have to do is go to our SharePoint page. We will share the link in the chat and just click the join button and you will be updated on future meetings, events, and also you will be able to participate in shaping next year and shaping the path for this youth ERG. So invest in your personal brand, use your personal brand with us, and thank you very much for joining. Finally, we would love to hear your feedback on this session. Simply just scan the QR code. It should take you to a feedback Google form. You can fill it out now or after the event. We would really appreciate your comments to help us build this group. Thank you very much. And yes, slides will be available as well as the recording of this event.
All of this can be found on the Youth ERG SharePoint that you just saw here. This is where we'll store all the repository of documents, resources, links as well. Yeah. If not, we are right on time. Thank you, Julian, for hosting today's event. Thank you, Tamina, for your vulnerable insights. Julian as well, yes.
One final question from Bohar. The ERG is open to everyone. As long as you are committed and believe in youth development, you are more than welcome to join our ERG. You just simply have to click the join button and you will be a member of our group. So it is open to all ages, all professions, all backgrounds.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
You.
Thank you.
Thank you and bye.
We hope
Thank
that
you
you
very
join
much.
the ERG
Bye.
and participate in our future initiatives as well.
Thank
Yes, I
you.
hope to see everybody at the next session.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.